From 1914 to 1940, many films, cartoons, and documentaries came out of World War I and the post-war years as ways of distributing propaganda, which is defined as the systematic effort to manipulate other people's beliefs, attitudes, or actions by means of symbols for a cause. Cinema was a popular source of entertainment, but when seen through a propaganda lens, it is clear that countries used film as a vehicle for propaganda to get people involved in the World War I effort, increase support for social revolutions and new governments, fuel rivalries and hatred of other countries, and intensify nationalism.
In Great Britain, the main use of propaganda films was to get people involved in the efforts of sustaining World War I. Wellington House, led by Charles Masterman, was the official bureau in Britain that created and distributed the films, most of them showing battle imagery to promote patriotism and reveal the true destruction of the Great War.
One specific film released in 1915 was Britain Prepared, which was 3 hours of showing how prepared Britain was for the war, and it didn't answer people's wishes for real footage from the front lines. Battle of the Somme, released in 1916, fulfilled these desires by recounting the bloodiest battle of World War I, with the most popular part of the movie being shots of soldiers going over the top of the trenches into no man's land. Battle of the Somme greatly contrasted the largely held opinion that war was heroic, brave, and glorious by showing people the magnitude and destruction of World War I. Emotionally, many people felt like they could understand the experiences of their loved ones in the war, but politically, Wellington House had the goal of making sure people saw the necessity of fighting until victory was achieved.
Wellington House tried to create more battle films, but official films decreased in popularity as attitudes toward the war changed. Once Russia left the war in 1917, Germany was advancing with more strength, and victory came at too high a price for many. As more of the war was shown to the public, people began to see it as a cruel waste of resources and lives, and film wasn't enough to change opinions.
The United States also used cinema to garner support for World War I, especially because the war's destruction was already apparent to many Americans when it came time for U.S. entry. The American government told people that they had to join the war effort after the Lusitania, a ship with some American passengers, was hit by German torpedoes. It was broadcasted that there was a moral need and duty of the citizens to fight after seeing this tragedy. A cartoon, The Sinking of the Lusitania, released in 1918, assisted in convincing people of the necessity to fight. As it can be seen in the clip of the torpedo going to the ship, the animation itself is quite unrealistic, but as it portrays a real event, people felt as though it was factual. The text is very dramatic, as shown in the intertitles. By using this language, it further paints Americans as victims and makes viewers want to assist the war effort, even though there were only 200 American passengers out of thousands of British ones. The cartoon ends with an intertitle that fully places blame on Germany, and the final clip depicts a woman trying to save her child as they drown, which sticks in the viewer's mind as they remember the innocence of the people who died.
Overall, this cartoon is a great representation of propaganda cinema because it attempted to give people the realism they desired, but it was presented in a softer, more palatable way. There have been recent discoveries that the ship was actually transporting munitions to the British, therefore justifying the German attack. The U.S. selectively left this out of the film to maintain the innocence of the passengers, making it clear that this film was created by the American government to incite patriotism and motivate people to join the fight.
In addition to wanting to increase support for the war, the U.S. also took advantage of its ability to portray its enemies in a bad light through film, seeing as it was a powerful force in shaping popular culture. It was even said in 1923 in the New York Morning Post that film is to America what the flag was once to Britain. By its means, Uncle Sam may hope someday to Americanize the world.
To accomplish this Americanization, in 1929, another American propaganda cartoon was released called The Barnyard Battle, featuring Mickey Mouse. This Disney short shows some scenes of war, including trench warfare, but it focuses more on increasing hatred of Germany. The American soldiers are the Mickey Mouses, and it is clear that they are organized, equipped with weapons, and ready for war. To contrast, the cats are seen walking on all fours, growling and slobbering, in hats traditionally worn by German soldiers, thus portraying the Germans as primitive and savage. This cartoon can be seen as a funny battle on a farm, but when analyzing the broader context, it is the clear message that Americans will always defeat German aggression through superior technology and organization.
Both of these American cartoons show a hatred of Germany, but The Sinking of the Lusitania is much more focused on inciting patriotism and a desire to fight, while The Barnyard Battle makes viewers see Germans as stupid, primitive, and aggressive in comparison to the superior Americans.
In the Soviet Union, the goals of propaganda cinema were directed at increasing support for the new communist government. In the early 1900s, the Soviet Union faced massive casualties in World War I, and from 1920 to 1922, the country suffered an industrial collapse and millions of lives were lost due to famine. As described in the textbook, Russia was exhausted. A peasant banner proclaimed, "Down with Lenin and horseflesh, bring back the Tsar and pork." As Leon Trotsky said, the country and the government with it were at the very edge of the abyss. In this time of need, both Lenin and Stalin attempted to create a strong Soviet society. Notably, the movies that we watched, Strike, Battleship Potemkin, and October, 10 Days That Shook the World, all begin with quotes from Lenin, indicating from the first moment on that communism was the ideal and would hopefully solve the many problems of the time.
The director of these movies, Sergei Eisenstein, was a pioneer of montage, a form of film that strung clips together to create the narrative of the piece. Soviet movies used the art of juxtaposition, which cuts between two contrasting clips to create a deeper and stylistic effect through association.
Juxtaposition is used in the movie Strike, released in 1925, which opens with a quote from Lenin talking about how revolutions needed to be organized in order to achieve the goals of the proletariat. The film depicts a workers' strike in pre-revolutionary Russia, cutting between the workers, government officials, inspectors, and animals. By doing so, the workers are portrayed as common, dirty, and defenseless animals, while the government is portrayed by large, predatory, and exotic animals to show their wealth, status, and power. These animal motifs appear throughout the movie, in moments when an inspector hits a dead cat hanging from a structure, relating to an earlier instance when a worker hung himself, and when cats fall and children are dropped by police off of balconies. This shows how even though the workers spend long hours in factories and barely have enough to live on, they will continue to be beaten down by the Tsar and the capitalist system. The movie ends with fields of people being shot down, juxtaposed with the gruesome slaughtering of cattle, furthering the viewer's feelings of shock and horror.
Overall, the movie works as propaganda to show the terrible lives created by the Tsarist government and the wealthy capitalists. This is evident in one particular scene in which stockholders are reviewing the workers' demands. One of them crumples up the demands and uses it as a napkin, demonstrating how the wealthy have no regard for the stripe of the workers, living lavishly while people struggle to make ends meet, thus making them the enemy. This film serves as communist propaganda, hoping to show people how even though there were problems at the time of the film's release, the Tsarist regime was much worse, and people should be enthusiastic and supportive of the new government.
Battleship Potemkin begins with another Lenin quote that discusses revolution being a lawful, just form of war. This movie recounts the 1905 mutiny of Battleship Potemkin and starts with the sailors refusing to eat the magnum-infested meat they were given and revolting. Citizens of the Ukrainian town Odessa gather to support the rebelling sailors, providing food and supplies. However, in the climactic scene famously known as the Odessa Steps, the Tsarist officials shoot down the citizens, showing clips of individual people being brutally killed. This is a powerful scene that clearly shows that the Tsar has no mercy for the innocent. The film ends with the Tsar's navy facing off against the sailors, but the soldiers refuse to shoot Battleship Potemkin and instead stand with them, and everyone cheers as the ship is allowed to pass through.
This film shows tragedy as well as victory for the communists, but in reality, much of it was fabricated by Eisenstein. It is true that there was a mutiny and there was brute force from the Tsar's soldiers, but it has been recently discovered that there was no massacre on the Odessa steppes. For many years, this movie was extremely popular and regarded to be a realistic and historical portrayal that showed the inspiring communist fight, demonstrating how Battleship Potemkin is truly an incredibly successful and effective work of propaganda cinema.
October, 10 Days That Shook the World depicts the events that happened during the October-November Revolution of 1917 and was created for the 10-year anniversary of the revolution. It is dedicated to the Petrograd proletariat and shows the struggles and uprisings of the working class during the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. In February of 1917, Alexander Kerensky led the provisional government, but he made the terrible mistake of keeping Russia in World War I. The Bolsheviks, led by Lenin, would not stand for this, and in October of 1917, they began the radical phase of the revolution, fighting for peace, land, and bread for the peasants against the garishly luxurious and foolish bourgeoisie. This film is supposed to be a dramatized but realistic eyewitness account of the events that actually occurred and serves as propaganda promoting the communist goals of the Bolsheviks.
Japan also used propaganda cinema, but it was focused on fueling rivalries with the United States and increasing support for a potential war with America. Japan was on the winning side of World War I, and, eager to be seen as an equal amongst the major Western powers, Japan attended the Paris Peace Conference in 1919. Japan attempted to add an amendment to the Charter of the League of Nations stating that all nations in the League would be treated equally and not discriminated against for their nationality, with the Japanese delegation stating that they wanted nothing but peace and justice. However, even though the proposal received a majority vote, U.S. President Woodrow Wilson overturned it, alienating Japan from other countries. And in 1924, an act was created in the U.S. that barred legal entry to Japan.
The US also proposed that the major powers get rid of many of their warships, creating a fixed ratio of capital ships relative to the other countries. In the five-power naval limitation treaties signed on February 6, 1922, the respective ratios that were assigned allowed the US and Great Britain to have a much stronger navy than Japan. In the mid-1930s, Japan's demand for equality regarding the number and size of their capital ships was rejected, and Japan gave advance notice of their intent to terminate the treaty, which then expired at the end of 1936.
In 1934, Japan released a propaganda cartoon set in the year 1936, when the five-power naval limitation treaty was set to expire, clearly using altered versions of beloved American cartoon characters, such as Felix the Cat and Mickey Mouse, and animating in the style of popular American cartoonists. It is evident that the cartoon depicts the rivalry between Japan and the U.S., and although it is cute and funny, it implies that once the treaty expired, the U.S. would attack Japan without mercy.
Side, represented by an army of evil Mickey Mouses, snakes, crocodiles, and bats, throws a banner down to the Japanese side, reading "Relinquish the island." As it is written in katakana, the syllabic alphabet that signifies a foreign language, the words are not written the way they would usually appear. This creates an overall unsettling and unnerving effect, and because of the unfamiliarity of using the wrong alphabet, the message is easily conveyed to the young children who would be watching the cartoon, as the propaganda is focused on creating a generation ready for war.
While the American side is portrayed by animals typically seen as frightening, the Japanese side is portrayed by individual cute creatures and children, as well as beloved legendary heroes from popular Japanese folklore. The critters summon Momotaro, Kintaro, Isun Boshi, and Benkei the warrior monk, among many others, to help them, all of whom are well-known characters that are celebrated and respected for being strong, brave, loyal, and noble in the Japanese culture. The origins of their legends date back even as far as the year 794.
The American side uses our bombs and machine guns, while Japan has swords and tanks to protect the children inside against the gigantic Mickey Mouse and his evil army, showing the contrast between the violent, deadly, and offensive attacks of the Americans against the defensive and innocent Japanese side.
The overall message of propaganda that is conveyed throughout this cartoon is that Japan, as an older and more established civilization, will triumph over America and their violence by using non-violent methods, creating peace and happiness. America is portrayed as self-serving, backstabbing, and greedy, with Mickey Mouse as the symbol of pure American imperialist evil.
In the 1930s in Germany, propaganda films were used to increase nationalism and support for the Nazi government. Joseph Goebbels headed the Ministry of Propaganda, and in 1935, Leni Riefenstahl was commissioned to create the film Triumph of the Will, a documentary of the 1934 Nazi Party Congress of Nuremberg. After World War I, Germany faced serious economic decline and rapid inflation, causing instability and the opportunity for a new leader. Adolf Hitler realized that he would need to gain power legally, so the Nazi Party needed to become a large political party that could gain a majority of votes. This film is representative of how Hitler rose to power by appealing to people's desires for an honorable, stable Germany after years of turmoil.
For example, the excerpts of Hitler's speeches in the film all focus on industrialization and peace because during this time people most wanted economic and political stability. To further exemplify the ideals of purity of German race and a militaristic society presented in the Nazi doctrine, conformity is especially apparent throughout the film. Crowds of workmen are very neatly organized into rectangles, and they all have a strong sense of obedience and duty, very much like soldiers.
Also apparent in the film is the happiness of his supporters. The majority of Triumph of the Will shows parades and crowds of people cheering for Hitler, indicating how Riefenstahl wanted the viewer to believe in Hitler's ideas as well. After years of economic problems and the defeat of World War I, it was critical for Hitler to make people believe in Germany's strength, and through that they would believe in Nazi ideals.
Riefenstahl also interestingly combines aerial shots into the regular footage, and from above, the images of people marching are incredibly organized. In the roll call scene, workers list the different towns they come from, but they are all from Germany and united under Hitler's rule, demonstrating the loyalty, unity, and nationalism that the Nazi government wanted for their nation.
After analyzing many propaganda films that were used to increase support for World War I, spread the ideas of revolutions and new governments, intensify rivalries, and increase nationalism, it is clear that media played a huge role in adding to the tension between nations, eventually leading to the widespread destruction of World War II.